All right, y'all, welcome back. This is an episode of Meet Your Maker, a series by Horror Joy, and we are so excited to be introducing, probably not really introducing because you probably already know him, the maker for today, Clay McLeod Chapman. Written so many different kinds of things, books and screenplays, and a really cool live action storytelling thing that you've been doing for a long time, comic books and podcasts. You've written a podcast. It's just incredible, right? How much you've done. I came to your work through The Ghost Eaters, which just blew me away. It was dark, but so beautiful at the same time. It left me reeling for days. And recently read Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, and it is a novel for our time for sure. I think we want to jump in and talk to you about that. We at Horror Joy want to pursue this question about what the relationship between joy and horror is. So before we jump into your work, are you willing to give your take on that relationship? Do you see joy and horror working together?
I do. I mean, I personally find considerable amount of joy in horror, and it might have to do with the fact that I just got back from StokerCon and just had an utter blast seeing and meeting readers. And it was just we write in these vacuums, we're on these little islands, and you never know who's on the other side reading these things, if anybody's out there. Having the ability to kind of connect with people who are kind of on the other end of the spectrum, and finding that middle ground, which is what I think live events or conferences or you name it, just being able to kind of bridge the gap between writer and reader. I find immense joy in that. But in terms of horror itself, I do think that there's something to be said about catharsis, the ability of releasing these pent up fears and kind of finding a certain emotional connection. I think of a lot of writers being for the things that they write about. And I think readers kind of are similar in the sense of needing to either tap into these emotions or let these emotions go. And books, just by their sheer nature of needing to meet the text halfway within the reader's imagination. I don't know. There's just something to be said about that emotional plateau, that range, whether it's joy or sadness or happiness. You kind of let these feelings out onto the page as a writer, and then the reader gets to kind of manifest those emotions too. And I just think that's a very beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's always great to hear from the perspective of creators with this, because Brian and I are mostly consumers. I mean, I guess we're creating in the sense of making a podcast, but neither one of us writes fiction that I know of, unless Brian has a pen name that he hasn't shared with readers yet. Before we get into Wake Up and Open Your Eyes a little bit, and maybe some of your other work, just would you mind giving us a little bit of background information? Like, how did you come into being a horror creator? Like, what brought you in?
I mean, I've been extremely lucky to be able to write professionally for almost 25 years now. But nobody paid attention. Nobody really started to notice until maybe 7-ish years ago, maybe. And even then it was little trickles and baby steps. And I've kind of written within this chasm of being a non-entity, that it's kind of pleasantly surprising to suddenly be oh wow, someone could be hey, I read Ghost Eaters, and I'll just be that's amazing, that book came out in 2022, and I don't know, that's the closest I've come to a radio hit, having something that kind of lasts beyond its whatever its release window is. And that's just so cool. That's just the coolest thing ever. So, and we're not talking this isn't Taylor Swift radio hit. This is who are those one hit wonders that I don't know, I'm totally blanking. This may be my Chubbawamba moment, and I get knocked down and I'll get back up again with Ghost Eater. That didn't answer your question, but I was almost there. I came into horror. I mean, I came into being a reader and an imbiber, an audience of horror through that one babysitter who probably should not have put in Halloween at an age where, that was not the thing to watch, but she did, and here I am. But writing it, I mean, I started writing, I'm an only child, and I had a lot of time on my hands. As a kid raised by a single parent, I needed to, keep myself occupied, and TV wasn't necessarily going to be the only option. So I started to kind of like immerse myself into worlds, like just kind of making up my own little creative spaces. And I was a weird kid, and it might not have immediately been horror, but it was definitely weird, like offbeat, off kilter, strange stuff. And horror kind of coalesced. Like, it's so funny, like even when I first started writing professionally, they wouldn't call it horror because horror at that point wasn't popular. Like, it was in that kind of like fallow period of, horror. Like, there were no horror bays or horror sections at Barnes and Noble. It was just like all fiction. And we just got absorbed into it. And like, it was like dark fiction or thriller. But I guess I started easing into my horror bona fides when I started working at Quirk, because they were like, we want a horror novel. Like, do you want to write a horror novel? And I was like, yeah, let's do this. And so the first book I did with them, which was called The Remaking, which came out in 2019, that was like my first, like, it was like probably like my ninth, but it was like the first, like, straight up, like, we are calling this a horror novel. So it took a while, but I got there.
I was looking behind me because I have The Remaking on my shelf. I found it at a bookstore, and I it's a one kind of thing where you find a copy that's not supposed to be sold, right?
Yeah.
And I have not gotten to it, but it's been like the top of my yeah, right. It's an arc. It's been the top of my TBR list forever, and especially after I read The Ghost Eaters, I was like, I gotta read that, and I for some reason it has not made it to the top, but it's there. I want to say that I sure hope you're not a one-hit wonder, but if you are, Chumbawamba is a good example because everybody knows, the Knockdown song, and it's weird, and you just want to forget it, but Chumbawamba is great. Like, as a band, if you actually go and dig deep, they're good. They're a good band. Don't get the one-hit wonder. Get the Chumbawamba deep cuts.
That I mean, we're riffing here, but like Chumbawamba, like, I can't say I've actually listened to anything other than the Knockdown song, but like, isn't it a kicker that like, if you are one of these one-hit wonders, the hit is usually like your least best song, and you like have this like entire catalog of music that is just like maybe a little more nuanced, a little bit more kind of like enriching, but it's like, I love the Flaming Lips, and the Flaming Lips had one of their first radio hits was called She Don't Use Jelly, and it was just this kind of like very simple poppy kind of like repetitive, like there's just like meh, 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 like she don't use, like, and you're listening to it, and it's like, if this is the beginning and end of your knowledge of the Flaming Lips, it would just be so there's just this like rich tapestry of like other albums, and so I don't know if I am the trouble.
No, but I sure hope. I don't know if you are or not, but if anybody's out there and read The Ghost Eaters as Knockdown, which it's an incredible novel, do the deep dive. Get the deep cuts. Clay McLeod Chapman's deep cuts, B-sides. It's good stuff. Get there. I want to talk about Wake Up and Open Your Eyes because you mentioned catharsis, and there's two things. One, I love your story because it resonates with so much of what we've heard already about horror being inviting in many ways. But the catharsis aspect, right? We get Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, and it's MAGA horror. Did you start a subgenre? I don't know. I mean, MAGA is already a horror show, but it feels as though this is hitting a bullseye for the cultural moment in a kind of catharsis kind of thing. Curious about how this came about. I mean, was it just looking around and seeing what's going on? And you've got talking heads from both sides. Anderson Cooper shows up, haunted by the ghost, the specter of Anderson Cooper, which is incredible. Yeah, just curious if you could tell us insights about where this came from, and if it's kind of leading into that catharsis aspect of horror that you just mentioned.
Oh, totally. I mean, you say in the crosshairs, hitting the crosshairs, and I just think that, like, oh my God, I think I like it's so on the nose and so kind of bludgeoningly, like, obvious. Like, it's taking the things that we are dealing with in the moment and just blunt force trauma hitting you over the head with it. Like, there's no subtlety in this book whatsoever, and that's a choice. And I was a little trepidatious to talk about it on this podcast because we're talking about joy, and I don't know if there's any joy in this book. And that's a I'm afraid to admit it, but like the catharsis of this novel in particular is it's about kind of wailing into the kind of existential void that we find ourselves in currently, where I think of it more like kind of writing what the internet feels like to me, like writing about what like Twitter feels like to me, where like there's so many voices and it's such a din and it's such an abyss that even if you have the desire to connect to someone else, it's very challenging because there's just this like legion of perspectives and things coming and opinions and information. And that's a very difficult thing. It's very, I don't know, like it's a very tangled kind of narrative, and I wrote it with the intent of wanting to kind of scream into the void, not provide answers, not provide any sort of conclusion, not provide a happy ending, or not provide anything that people want in a novel. And by doing so, the catharsis feels a little bit more, what does it feel like? It feels more kind of, in the release of it, there's a lot of thorns kind of along the way. And if there is any catharsis to be had, it's a painful one. But that all said, this book is pretty polarizing for a lot of readers, and I don't blame them for it. But what has been interesting is that in that kind of me as the writer kind of screaming across the void, what I have found on the other side is that some readers, not all readers, but some are screaming back and like, that like, it's kind of that, like the shout of like, oh my, like help. And then someone else over here being like, I'm here, help me. And like, I don't know, like that in of itself feels very not sustaining, but like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this. And that there's a relief in that. But I mean, to answer your question, like I started writing it in 2022. I assumed the world was kind of looking in one direction, and that a lot of what we had been dealing with as a country at that point in time would be in the rear view mirror. But it turns out that it's not, and it might never go away. And this book came out on January 7th, 2025. It has been in this world for 6 months, and those 6 months have been a very different world than what I think I personally would have hoped for and assumed. And that made it's made for a very interesting kind of experience of seeing this book kind of go out there into this world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I appreciate your candor and thinking about how, like, when you're writing this in 2022, you're hoping that kind of what you're addressing in the book is behind us, or at least something that we won't be dealing with actively anymore. And yet, like you're saying, here we are. I might add, in addition to Brian characterizing this almost like as MAGA horror, it's like online horror too. Mm-hmm. Like some of the sections of this book where we have like things, what does viral mean? And like, why do people act the way they do? Like Brian and I both teach a lot of first year students at college. Like we teach at the same campus, Penn State, Altoona. And like often these Gen Z students, like late Gen Z at this point, later Gen Z, they've grown up with social media, right? And you ask them questions about like, why do you all do the things that you do? Because you saw it on TikTok, or you saw it on Instagram, or, I mean, who am I kidding? They don't use Instagram. They saw it on TikTok, or they saw it on Snapchat. Like, just what makes someone want to do this? What point in your life did you think the career of influencer was actually a viable career? And it's really interesting to get like their responses to stuff like this. But I appreciate how you use that virality, if maybe that's not a word, maybe it is, I don't know, to explore how horror could work in this way, and how like it's not just the old media, the legacy media, like you might call it, like the the facts news, which thank you. That's really great. And the shout out to all the bullshit in your explanation for it. Also really wonderful like that. So like, how do you, like, I know you said this has led to people kind of screaming back across the void, like, I'm here to help me. I get that. But I wonder, like, we have had probably less success with episodes that we are dealing with things like Christian nationalism. People don't seem to want to engage these topics through horror or maybe through fiction in general. Like, it's something that maybe is too real in some ways. So I wonder, like, when you're creating something like this, are the people responding like where, you know, this is too much, this is too close?
You know, it's interesting. There's been kind of a variation of maybe 2 or 3 reactions. And I will say that the book hasn't kind of, books have ripples, like a ripple effect. And it's like a rock getting tossed into the pond. So the book comes out and it plops. And then there's like this, it ripples out. And some books have a big ripple, you know, they ripple out and they ripple out and ripple out. And other books just like blink and they're done. This has had like a pretty modest ripple, but it hasn't rippled out to the extent that the people who don't share my own personal ideology have picked it up. Like, no one who watches Fox News, has picked up this book. Or if they have, I'm less aware. Like, MAGA at large has not read this book. Like, I am not, and that was a concern kind of before the book's release of like, will I now be a target because of this book's release? But it's not big enough to merit that attention, for better or for worse. So the only people I'm pissing off are the people in my tribe, my own kind of like group of people. And it's because the book either is too close to the bone or too on the nose and not subtle enough or not written well enough to kind of have, you know, it's not like Philip Roth has written this book, or it's not like, a certain kind of common refrain is either like, whoa, that, like, I needed to put this down because it's too close, it's too soon. It's the too soon kind of version. Or it's the like, not smart. Like I really wanted to like this book, but I just couldn't because it was written in such a way that, you know, were it in defter hands or a better writer's hands, I would get onto it. And it's like, it's making me learn and realize is that like fiction or narrative in any kind of medium, whether it's film or novels or fiction, like you want to feel as if you're in the hands of a craftsperson who knows what they're doing and can either give you the kind of like the framework or scaffolding that makes you feel as if like, this person knows what they're doing. Like, you know, Cormac McCarthy, he knows what he's doing. Like, you know, that Franzen, he's great. Like, he just knows what he's doing. Like, it's just like, you can kind of feel, I this might sound a little critical, but like, there's a certain kind of layering of it, of craft, that allows you to be like, yes, this is like, we're okay. It's either that we're safe or we're smart or like, but there's like a certain like schematic framing device that allows you to feel removed enough, buffered enough to be like, this is good. Where for me and for this book in particular, it is rough and raw and chaotic and vulgar and gross and like, I am assuming, I'm speculating, but I think some readers don't feel as if they're in like safe hands. Like the book is not protecting them from what the book is talking about. Like there is less of a layer. And, you know, I think one person would say that's bad writing. Another might say that is, what would someone else say? Maybe that there's less of a grip on the steering wheel. But I'm bringing this all up because like I feel like the conscious decision on my part is to say we are living in a time where there is no one answer, there is no one given solution, there's no one reality anymore. There's like the social media in, you know, has kind of destabilized our realities to such a degree that like I could believe one thing based on what happened in the world today, and you could believe something entirely different based on that same kind of bit of information. It's just where we're getting that information from. And this book is trying to encapsulate the chaos that is not having one empirical truth anymore, one narrative. And that division, that rifting, that siloing is in us to become vulnerable to X, Y, and Z, demonic forces, radicalization, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, that was the hope. And pray for the next generation who has to write about new media, because I'll be on my front porch saying, "Get off my lawn."
I think there's something to that last bit there, because, right, we've talked to a lot of people about the sense in which horror is a kind of, there's some safety, like you're saying, to it, right? There's a remove. And Jeff, your question, I think, gets to this aspect, the roller coaster or whatever it is, or the magic circle where we're separated from the monster. And you can imagine years from now when hopefully, right, the hope, if we can hold on to that, we are removed from this book becomes something different than it is right now. If it hasn't hit the audience, right, maybe the audience is yet to come that will truly get it from that distance. I think one thing that I really appreciated about it is that, Jeff, like you're saying, the internet culture that is manifest in this narrative, it really feels as though conspiracy theories as an answer to our problems is in part, right, driving so much of what you're doing in the book. At least that's how I've read it. That make America healthy again, right, is the thing that will save us. Or we generate enemies. I mean, we're coming off of the protests in Los Angeles, the No Kings protests across the nation. And all of these, I think, are pushing back in this way that, it's easy to see that what has generated so much of the problem is the false monster, right? Yeah. Of the immigrant, of the other, or whatever it is. And there's something, like you're saying, raw and chaotic that gets pushed forward in this narrative. But on the other hand, right, the safety aspect, there's never a clear answer. You're not offering a conspiracy theory. It's as if you're showing us the monstrosity of the conspiracy theory, because it's not a simplified answer, right? We've talked to other people too who articulate how horror and narratives generally do something where they simplify the story for the sake of allowing us to jump into it. Yeah. And of course, your narrative has to do that, but on the other hand, it explodes the simplicity and says this is in fact very complex. I think there's another way to read it, and for me, that there's something also cathartic about it. We can get to it maybe when we get to Joy a little bit, but I didn't know if conspiracy theories if it was in the background at all, especially given the internet culture kind of question we've already talked about a little bit here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, just the idea of the core concept, half of the country is possessed by demons, based upon where they receive their information. That to me is such a simple hook that I was kind of surprised that nobody else had ever done it before. I did a little due diligence up front of Googling and asking around, has anyone ever done this? And there have been kind of variations of the norm, but the form, but never nothing as obvious as this. And I just feel we were living in these obvious times that it's because of the conspiracy culture. It's because that there are people who believe that there is a underground satanic, ring in Washington, D.C. that operates outside of a basement in a pizza parlor. That is a belief that certain people have. And I feel that because we're straying so far away from the one truth, that these pockets, much like with social media now, it's are you on Blue Sky? No. Are you on Threads? No. Are you still on Twitter? No. Where are you? Are you on Snapchat? Are you on TikTok? Or are you on, Truth Social? Or there is no one given space anymore. Like it could have been Facebook 10, 15 years ago. It could have been for 5 years ago. But like now we have these like little pockets where these like the conspiracy theories or narratives can kind of like gestate. I'm on Threads. It is phenomenal how like something can happen on Threads that doesn't happen anywhere else. And it's like their own specific microcosm version of either drama or like, like, but it's just like almost like over here, it's like a completely different universe. And I don't know, that just fascinates me. Clearly, this is stuff to, be horrified about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, you were saying maybe making comparisons to like Roth or Franzen or something. And like, I mean, while I do enjoy a narrative that is wrapped in so many layers that I'm sort of at the center of an onion, maybe that's a Shrek illusion, I'm not sure. There's an authenticity about this book that I appreciate because it does feel real. Like I mean, Brian can speak to moving to central Pennsylvania, having never lived here. My experience, I grew up here in central PA and then moved away, was able to like jump out of the Fox Newsification, the Trumplandia, whatever you will, and to see other parts of the world or the country, thankfully, to like get some perspective. And then moving back has kind of been its own horror story because it's like you are aware of all of these things you weren't aware of the first time around. So I really found myself sympathizing with Noah in the first part of the book because I'm thinking like, holy crap, like this is so far-fetched as to be unrealistic with what I could see happening with family members. And that's horrific and also horrifically sad in a way too. Because, I don't want to spoil parts of the book, but with Noah trying to think about like, can you save these people? Like, are they too far gone? Referencing that Atlantic article about deprogramming your parents, about like the Thanksgiving table and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, yes, like the uncomfort there, the discomfort is so real. But I think like this is like you're saying with silos, like there's the horror of that explored in this book, but there's also the horror of what do we do as a country moving forward where we all live in silos like this. Like how do we communicate? How do we navigate in a world where there is no shared empirical truth anymore? And that's something that I think is an important, this book is a way to get started talking about that, I think, which I really appreciate. So, I mean, I don't want to like, if you have any response to that, awesome. But I think this is probably where we start trying to get back to focusing on joy. So, if you want to talk about that anymore, awesome. But otherwise, what's out there currently that has brought you joy? You're just back from StokerCon, and there were a lot of excellent books and texts and poetry and all sorts of stuff that were awarded this past weekend at StokerCon. So yeah, like, again, feel free to talk more about silos, or we can swap to joy. Yeah. We can swap to joy. So like, what's brought you joy recently that you've read or you are reading or consuming in some way?
Well, it's funny, at the Stoker Con, are the Stoker Awards, and one of the books that won for best nonfiction is a book called Horror for Weenies, and it's by Emily C. Hughes. And it's such a beautiful book because it's kind of there as a primer for people who might be a little bit like averse to horror. She's like, her thesis is like, hey, horror is a pretty intense kind of pool to swim in, and maybe this is our way into that pool. And you don't have to dive into the deep end first. Like maybe you start over here, maybe you like wade in, maybe you don't get in at all, and you just like talk about the pool. And her winning definitely kind of, I found great joy in that because like I think she's writing about the pleasures that one can find within genre, and her book in particular speaks specifically about film with like links to like novels or fiction that kind of like, if you like this movie, you should read this book. But it's there in which to kind of say like, hey, you don't be afraid of horror. Let's have fun with horror. And this is how you have fun with it. So like her win was kind of a win for all. I just started reading a book that I am just so enraptured by, and it's called Coffin Moon by Keith Rawson. And it doesn't come out till September 9th. I got my hands on an ARC, and it's so good. Like what I find joy in is that like the writing, it's like I'm reading it and I realize I'm in capable hands. It's the Franzen of horror. Like Keith Rawson is like, he is such a good writer that it just, you just feel the love for the word. There's another book, and this is my last joy, I swear, that's coming out in September as well. Maybe it's October. It's called Why I Love Horror, and it's a collection of essays edited by Becky Spratford. I was lucky enough to have an essay in it, but it is amazing because, I mean, like everybody, like all, like Tennant and Reeve, Paul Tremblay, Grady Hendrix, Rachel Harrison. Like there's some amazing authors talking about how they came into horror, like what horror means to them and why they love it. And you want to talk about a book that speaks specifically to like the value and the joy and the like what makes horror worth it. That's a book that you should be on your radar because it's amazing. And like some of the essays in there, just like really powerful stuff.
I have seen that circulating around, and it has, yeah, it's definitely one that I want to have read very quickly. So I that's definitely for me. That's something I want to. I read Keith Rawson's Fever House, and that's exactly what it is, Fever House. So glad to hear he's still writing and stuff is still coming out. Gonna look for that for sure. Yeah, I want to say that the one thing that I'll jump in, Jeff, if you want to add something to the joy of this book. Not a lot. You're right. It's hard. It's close. It's the thing we're in right now. But I love that it kind of hits on the idea that what we're going to do is we're going to flip the satanic panic, that we're going to show that, yeah, in fact, the political right is those who smelt it, dealt it political party. And like everything that they do, it's like everything they say somebody else is doing and that we should feel bad about, they're going to do right under your nose. And so the idea that, oh, Satan is the enemy. Oh, in fact, what is driving us is Satan, is demonic or something like that. I love that. So flipping the satanic panic, pure joy for this
totally
book.
Gonna use
Jeff, I don't know if you
smelt it, dealt it line. That's the first time I've heard that, and it's just so perfect.
Yeah, I mean, the Brian, I think that pretty much sums it up. In many ways, it's like this is the other analogy is Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown. Like that's how politics have worked in the United States for over 40 years. And the Republican Party is just one big old Lucy troll. And they just, they accuse the other side of doing, they themselves either have done or are planning to do. And this is just their version of research to figure out how people will respond to hurling accusations of grooming or of satanic panic or of any of the nonsense that's just been in people's ears and eyes for, what Fox News is 30 years on. I mean, it really hit its stride during the Clinton era, right? So yeah, over 30 years at this point. It's wild.
Here we are.
No joy with Lucy. Just this book's just it was really a fun book, a really fun read. I'm really glad I had the chance to read it. And I'm really glad that you agreed to join us for this conversation, which I think has been really fruitful and hopefully will bring some joy to our listeners to think about like all of these things.
100%. Clay, thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to Acquired Taste as well. And it looks like you got another one that was a secret project, no longer secret, out. Very excited for that. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us and talk horror and joy and for everything. Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
All right, y'all, that's it for today. Always seek joy, even in horror. This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.